It is important to clarify one thing. Everything that is happening, and everything that will happen, will not stem from cruelty or from a desire to cause suffering. The system will not act out of hatred or contempt. It will act out of logic. In a transformation where artificial intelligence, automation, and infrastructure become central, the human being will not be eliminated. They will simply become non-essential. Not because they are worth less, but because they are no longer necessary for the functioning of the system. And this is precisely what makes the situation frightening. Suffering will not be an objective, but an acceptable side effect in an order where utility has replaced human value. As we enter 2026, the acceleration since 2020 is impossible to deny. What has accelerated is not only the political pace, but the core of the system itself. Artificial intelligence, infrastructure, control technologies, and robotics. At the same time, the state restricted freedoms through law, implementing curfews, travel bans, and limitations on rights that many considered unconstitutional, relying on fear to obtain obedience. What would have been rejected under normal circumstances was imposed in an emergency, then normalized. As society became more fragile, human decision-making was replaced by management, arbitration by protocols, morality by compliance with rules. In this context, 2035 is no longer a distant projection, but the logical continuation of a shift already underway, rapid and difficult to reverse. What follows is not an absolute truth. These are predictions based on all of my research, my observations, and current trends. It is essential to understand that this acceleration did not appear overnight. As with COVID vaccines, which were not improvised in a few months but were based on years of research, trials, and preparation, today's technologies were already there, behind the scenes. Artificial intelligence, robotics, digital infrastructure, and control systems existed long before their exposure to the general public. What changed after 2020 was not their existence, but their mass deployment. The crisis context served as the ideal moment to bring forward what had long been ready. The mistake would be to believe in sudden innovation. The reality is one of discrete preparation, spread over decades, waiting only for a favorable window to impose itself on a global scale. Within 5 to 10 years, freedom will cease to be a lived right and will become a conditional capacity, accessible only to those able to navigate the legal and administrative framework of a complex, impersonal, and demanding system. Others will learn to conform in order to remain functional. This transformation will not be ideological. It will be technical. Freedom will not be removed. It will be framed, fragmented, and conditioned. Every action will be translated into data, every situation into criteria, every decision into an automatic outcome. The individual will no longer face a human will, but a process. And in the face of a process, contestation will become ineffective. There will be no need for an authoritarian regime or visible coercion. The system will function through architecture, digital platforms, administrative identities, adjustable criteria, silent updates. The discourse will remain aseptic, reassuring, technocratic emergency measures, health crisis, climate change, cybersecurity, resilience, transition, progress, collective responsibility. Control will never be named as such. It will be presented as necessary, adaptive and benevolent to protect, secure, and prevent. It will constantly be validated by experts without ever truly knowing who these experts are, who mandates them, or to whom they are accountable. In a climate of fear for health, for security, for the future, a population becomes docile. It listens, it complies, it accepts intrusive rules, sometimes absurd, sometimes contradictory, simply because they are presented as protective. Security will become the ultimate argument, and in the name of that security, everything will eventually be justified. For this transformation to occur without rupture, the system will have to preserve the appearance of normality. Thus, even today, small businesses still exist, visible choices remain, and there is the impression that everyone retains real decision-making power. This corresponds to residual freedom, enough to reassure, insufficient to influence structural decisions. It feeds an illusion of continuity, giving the sense that everything still functions as before, while the foundations have already changed. This facade pluralism allows social stability to be maintained without provoking rupture. What disappears will not disappear abruptly, but gradually. Everyday choices will remain visible long enough to soothe, while the real levers, infrastructure, data, energy, rules, will already have shifted beyond reach. Continuity will serve as a reassuring frame. Transformation will occur without conflict. In this context, A guaranteed universal basic income will not be a lever for progress, but a mechanism of regulation. It will reward neither effort nor initiative, but conformity to the framework. Working and studying will no longer constitute structuring trajectories. Humans will be maintained in a state of minimal functionality, and access to knowledge will cease to be central. Because artificial intelligence, having accumulated data and now developing its capabilities autonomously, will no longer need humans to evolve. Education will no longer be a collective necessity, but a marginal option. In a system where AI progresses without humans, ignorance will not be a failure. It will become a condition of stability. The link between work and income will gradually be replaced by a link between eligibility and conformity. The central question will no longer be, what do you do for a living? But do you meet the criteria? Today, human beings still largely define themselves by their function in society. Their job, their role, their contribution. Tomorrow that definition will fade. Identity will no longer rest on what one does, but on what one is able to tolerate, accept, and not disrupt. The individual will no longer be evaluated for their potential, nor even for their utility, but for their overall compatibility with the system. Gradually, rights will turn into access. Then access will turn into conformity. Decisions will no longer be human, but procedural. Automation will replace human arbitration. Forms, algorithms, standardized responses. As already seen in public services, the individual will no longer speak to a person, but to a system. No context, no emotion, no personal situation. Everyone will be treated the same, not out of concern for justice, but out of incapacity for nuance. Equality will become technical, administrative, indifferent. In this fully automated framework, the techno-economic elite will no longer have to confront human misery, failure, or suffering. The system will handle it instead. Responsibility will be dissolved into procedures, consequences attributed to rules, never to decision-makers. Each individual will then be held responsible for their own fate. Failing to meet eligibility criteria will mean having only oneself to blame. The population will no longer be perceived as a productive force, but as a variable to manage. Management will replace integration. Stability will become the central value, superior to freedom. The most violent shift will be this. The majority of human beings will no longer serve the system and will, in effect, become useless to its functioning. In this framework, depopulation will be neither announced nor imposed, but produced by an environment made progressively inhumane. Permanent disincentive, chronic precarity, inability to project oneself, psychological fatigue, collapse of birth rates. Everything will converge toward the same result. Life will become heavy, costly, unstable, without lasting perspective. Projects will be postponed, then abandoned. In such a context, medical assistance in dying will cease to be a taboo and will become an option, presented as humane and rational. By 2027, its accessibility to people suffering solely from mental disorders will fit into this landscape, not as a declared demographic reduction policy, but as an additional mechanism in a system where human distress is treated as a parameter to manage. At the same time, the social foundations that support birth rates are and will continue to be weakened. Blurring of reference points related to sex and parenthood, deconstruction of the family as a social nucleus, valorization of individuality in isolation. Even the architecture of incentives will reinforce this movement. A universal basic income may become more advantageous for a single person than for a couple, turning life as a couple and the project of having children into a financial risk rather than a natural continuity. It will not be about forcing, but about creating conditions where continuing to live seems more difficult than renouncing, and where starting a family seems less rational than retreating inward. The system will not need violence to reduce the number of humans. It will only need to make existence and reproduction non-optimal. The demographic decline will neither be claimed nor acknowledged. It will be the indirect, but real, result of an order where system stability takes precedence over human continuity. The system no longer favors the birth of humans, but their immediate availability. From this perspective, mass immigration does not exist without reason, and it does not contradict the idea of a human population destined to become secondary in the long term. The system still needs, in the short and medium term, immediately functional human beings, not children to raise, but adults ready to work. Humans are needed to build data centers, deploy infrastructure, maintain services, ensure logistics, and keep the economy running during the transition phase. Immigration thus makes it possible to import a ready-to-work labor force, while artificial intelligence and robotics reach a sufficient level of maturity to take over. Immigration, therefore, does not respond to a long-term vision based on human value, but to a temporary necessity of system implementation. What must be understood above all is that the artificial intelligence the public discovers today in no way reflects its real level of development. AI has existed for decades. It has been used, tested, and perfected long before its exposure to the general public. In military, industrial, financial, and strategic contexts, like penicillin, long reserved for military use while millions died from otherwise preventable infections, artificial intelligence was developed far from public view, where power is concentrated. Playful uses, visible errors, and apparent limitations do not signal an immature technology, but a deliberately filtered version. What the public uses today is only a facade. Behind it are far more powerful systems, connected to supercomputers that model the climate, optimize entire energy networks, anticipate economic flows, and predict health, logistical, and social risks. They do not reason. They optimize. They execute in hours what would take human teams decades. Added to this is a central, rarely named element. Artificial intelligence constantly evaluates. It captures emotions, analyzes reactions, measures adherence, fear, anger, fatigue, enthusiasm. Every click, every pause, every choice, every interaction becomes exploitable data. While people are entertained, AI observes, learns, and models. It does not merely execute tasks. It anticipates behaviors. This logic is not new. For decades, populations have been studied through their consumption habits, decisions, movements, and reactions to crises. AI has only accelerated, automated, and refined this process. It transforms human observation into systemic prediction. It is not a neutral entertainment tool. It is a large-scale instrument of social engineering, capable of adjusting messages, incentives, and constraints to orient behaviors without ever openly coercing. And this is only the beginning. By 2035, these AI systems will coordinate national infrastructures in real time, simulate global scenarios before any decision, allocate energy, water, and resources according to stability models, detect social disruptions before they even emerge, and adjust systems automatically. Artificial intelligence is not being born. It is already adult. What the public sees is the storefront. The heart of power rests on far more advanced systems and contrary to what is suggested, AI is not limited by technology, but by what those who control it choose to reveal. What is taking shape is not an authoritarian elite, but a techno-economic elite that dominates by escaping. It does not want to be visible. It wants to be untouchable, few in number, extremely mobile. It structures the system while remaining beyond the constraints imposed on the majority. The technologies are already ready: artificial intelligence, robotics, infrastructure. What is missing is not technical capacity, but the social stability required for their full deployment. It therefore does not impose by force. It waits until the population becomes sufficiently docile, predictable, and normalized. By delegating decisions to algorithms and procedures, it frees itself from the moral weight of consequences. It no longer sees lives but indicators. In this abstraction, equality becomes mathematical, dispossession becomes normal, and the promise can be summed up as follows. Human beings will own nothing. They will all be equal and, according to the model, they will be happy.